Sloppy Spoilers with your host, DT2. What's up, y'all? DT2 Comics Chat here. On this episode of Sloppy Spoilers, we're going to be talking about Moon Knight Season 1, Episode 5. And the episode is titled Asylum. Now, let me tell you something about penultimate episodes before I bring my co-host on. The penultimate episode of any season, of any series, will show you what the writers care about. As fans, we tend to look forward to and care about the finale, but the writers will always show you what's important to them in the penultimate episode. And you're going to see that truth ring all the way through everything that happens in this episode. So let me bring my co-host on. Welcome to David, Nemesis Howard.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Looking forward to talking about this episode. I think DT mentioned it last time. When I first watched this episode, I said, this is the episode that decides whether you like this series or not. And I still believe it. I think this was the seminal episode of this first season. So,
all right. And welcome to Jeff, Dr. Fate Bracey. How you doing, Bracey?
Don't sail away, don't sail away, don't sail the sand of sea. I mean,
all right. And shout out to Steve Sellers, not with us tonight, but
yeah,
always miss you, bro. So we'll
promises to be here for the finale.
Yeah, we'll catch up with him next time. So
he's a refugee right now, so very Egyptian Exodus there. So
so as I said in my
funny.
intro,
I've been reading Exodus lately.
As I said in my intro, if you really want to know what the writers care about, it's always in the second to last episode. Not sometimes, every time. I want you to go back and look at every series you've ever watched. I want you to go back and look at every series that you've ever loved. Everything that the writers care about is in the penultimate episode. Count on it. So now you can't unsee it now that I've said it. So everything that they think is important is going to show up there. And then, depending on the finale, always depends on clock management. It's no different from a game in the NFL. If you know how to manage the clock, you know what you're doing with your timeouts, you know what you're doing, you need to hustle, snap the ball, get the plays off, that kind of thing. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can lose the game just on bad clock management. How many times have we seen that? Well, that's what finales are about. Finales are about clock management. How efficiently can you wrap up or whet the appetite for next season or whatever it is you're trying to do in the time you have allotted. That's a finale. But the penultimate episode is all the stuff we want to say and blah, 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 blah. So having said that, looking at this episode is about the heart of this version of Moon Knight that they've created. So they borrowed from a couple different comic runs and then they've kind of thrown in their own twists to kind of make it their own. But this episode really shows the heart of what they believe this version of Moon Knight is about. Overall comments, I would say the emotional under and overtones are completely relatable. Even if you haven't had the same experiences, you've had those emotions. And when we start going through the scenes, we'll talk about the details of the scene, but emotionally, it resonates just if you're human, what we see here. The duality, is it real, is it not? How much is in anybody's head? And are there more people than Mark and Steven running around? That's front and center here too, also at the heart of what this version is about. What's over the top is how much time we spend getting to the heart of the matter. That's something that I would have changed a little bit more, because in the end, what it does is that, see, when you are going to set up a climactic battle You got to study people who know how to do that right. One of my favorite examples is, it's always the 80s stuff, The Empire Strikes Back and Aliens. Aliens is about two mothers fighting for their children. So by the time they come face to face, you feel the love, the passion, the heat, the tension, because they're both willing to give their lives for the children, the alien queen and Ripley and Newt. Empire Strikes Back, Vader is looking for Luke from the beginning. So by the time they actually meet in Cloud City, we've been building the whole movie to that confrontation. Here, with what's her name? I keep forgetting her name. The hippopotamus. Tenneret?
Thowlet.
Okay. With spending so much time with that in the sands and all different kind of stuff, see, we needed some more time with Amit and Khonshu as far as I'm concerned. So that's the only thing, here that, all that time and, so much humor and so many off-color jokes. And it had moments. I'm not taking away from any of the moments. But as far as I'm concerned, a little too much real estate for something that's not going to play out in the end. And the other thing I will say, then I'll throw it to my co-host. The other thing I will say is that, how can I say this without spoiling? Let me say, if you're going to...
We can spoil it, sloppy spoilers.
Okay.
If you're going to do a big old reset, then somebody in the audience is going to say, then what was the point of all that? That was one of the biggest complaints about the Book of Boba Fett and Mandu and Grogu. Because if Grogu was just going to reject becoming a Jedi and go back and hang out with his adopted father anyway, then what was the point of them first 2 seasons? We got to get you to the Jedi. We got to get you trained. I have to let you go. You can't stay with me. Then if we're just going to do a reset, then what was the point? And so that's kind of there's some elements of that in this episode, because all the time we spend seeing all this different kind of stuff in the big emotional moment, the big emotional goodbye. Okay, if it's going to be goodbye, it should be goodbye. That's what gives it weight. But it's just a big old reset. Okay, well, then what we go through all that for? So I know you can make an argument for the character arc and the emotional journey, and they needed that. I get all that, and I agree with that. But we could have shrunk that down to 15 minutes. Okay, and having said that, I'm going to throw it out. Give me your overall impressions. Start with Bracey.
Yeah, I have to completely agree with that assessment. We'll get into the problems that, how do you say it again, Nim? What's her name?
Towlet.
The issues I have with Towlet that I expressed a bit last time. And if we had condensed that, if we'd focused on the things that were really important, I understand that section of things is that's the eye candy of the episode. It's fun seeing the ship, the Duat, Towlet, all that. But really the meat and potatoes of this is about Mark and about Steven, about the man and what we're dealing with here. So we could have condensed that, and this episode would have been much more satisfying if we'd trimmed the fat off and we'd taken the end of last episode that we said didn't really fit last episode, tacked on here. That's what we could have filled that unneeded space with. Something that would have made this entire episode its own thing, and not have bled into the previous episode. That would have been much more satisfying. Still, even with the issues I have, I really did like the character stuff that goes on. I love the journey that Steven and Mark have. I love digging into his past. I love as somebody who was in behavioral psych in the military, I love seeing things that make people and characters tick. And we really get into all that, and we see again not just Mark's mental illness, but we see the mental illness that jumps on his mom and digs its hooks into her. So for me personally, there was a lot of really fascinating stuff in here to enjoy as a viewer and somebody who has some amount of training in the area. So that was pretty exciting stuff. And overall, it's just a really good narrative. Like I said, a couple of hiccups because Disney going to Disney, I guess. And there's them times where it's like, this show has mostly held a lot of gravitas to it, and and you've got Steven who can be comic relief, but as you're having Steven mature as a character, you don't need to throw in, an extra, monkey out of the barrel. That's unnecessary.
Okay. I would have made Amit more of a boss character. And I would have made her more present instead of just mentioned all throughout this episode, which gives you the roller coaster momentum into the finale.
You know what? She should have gotten some of the Thanos treatment, where we see her peppered throughout the series a little bit.
That's right.
Leading up to it.
As it is now, you have two different stories.
Mm-hmm.
You have the story of Mark and Steven, and have the story of Khonshu and Amit.
Yeah,
Anyway,
Amit should have been like Darth Vader. Even when she's on screen, we should feel her.
That's right. All right, Nims, overall thoughts about the episode?
Okay, well, I really like this episode. However, I think what you guys are saying, I definitely hear what you're saying, and I think it's absolutely correct. For me, there's a couple things. One is that the fantastical stuff with like Tawa and everything like that, I see that as kind of like the palate cleanser that they're trying to do, and I understand what they're doing, and they're trying to make it fantastical. Unfortunately, it does come off a little bit cartoony and childish at times. I don't know, take that for what it is. I enjoyed it to a certain extent, but I think that the criticisms definitely have merit. On the other hand, I have to say that Oscar Isaac is absolutely fantastic. I mean, his acting is incredible in this episode. And the stories they tell, I think why I love this episode so much is all of the stuff with Mark and
Steven.
Yeah, Jesus, I just Mark and
blank on
Steven.
the other name.
Yeah, and and a lot of it is unfortunately from personal experiences. A lot of what he went through, I have either been around or experienced myself, and so it rang very true to me, and it was very interesting, and I thought that everything was authentic, and it was incredible. And it was just engrossing for me. It held me and captivated me for the entire time that I was watching. My real critique is that I watched this and I was like, okay, kind of building on what you guys were saying, why did I watch the first 4 episodes? I was like, I could have had the first 4 episodes condensed into 1 or 1.5 episodes and then started with this, because this to me is where the story of Stephen Grant and Mark Spector really starts. This is where MoonKnight is, what MoonKnight is all about, and I have to give kudos to Disney for being brave in some of their decisions. First of all, I think I said it in one of our earlier episodes. I didn't think they would go there with him being Jewish and dealing with all that, but they did. And so kudos to them for keeping the character, and I think we need to give them credit when they do stuff like that, because they stayed true to who the character was in that sense and what his background was, and the awful thing that happened when he became the Moon Knight for Khonshu. So I just wish they had shown like Bushman and stuff like that, but that may be a little bit too much, or maybe they'll save that for another time. So, but I definitely appreciated that.
Can I make a quick point on that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't help but on rewatching, I was thinking about Mark's sequence that we'll talk about later, where he accepts the offer of Khonshu, and I was thinking, as a religious person, I was like, wow, like what would that be like? Because I mean, I'm sure his faith is a bit shattered by his life experience, but at the same time, you're all of a sudden answering the call of a pagan god when you've had a particular faith identity your entire life. That's some pretty heavy stuff.
Well,
It definitely is.
Well, what the brilliance of this show, we talked about it last time, is that it has a bunch of concurrently running themes, and we get all of them. All of them are great. There's so many different levels and layers, from mental illness to family childhood trauma to the weight of having superpowers. It's not always a glamorous kind of gig. This is definitely not Marvel's Batman, to the deeper philosophical issues of the Minority Report mindset. Is it all right to punish people for things they haven't done yet? I mean, it's chock full of great ideas, and they pull them off well. So, like we talked about before, the biggest enemy is time. Just 6 episodes to try to explore all that and introduce characters that, you know, love them or hate them. We're not neutral about them. So we know you've done a good job as a writer to where you evoke some type of reaction.
Yeah.
You don't have to love all the characters nor agree, but it's when characters are so bland that you get well, no, you need to rewrite that, do that. But casting great, and like Nim said, we talked about when we first saw this. This was a tour de force of acting for Oscar Isaac. I mean, that cannot be argued. I mean, this man just brought it in so many different ways and convinces you that he's Mark and Steven. And that part is just unbelievable. If he hasn't won any awards just for this episode alone, he needs to, because he brought it. He brought it on a Tatiana Maslany level, if you understand what I mean.
He's definitely one of the best actors of his generation, bar none. I mean,
That's right.
Wow.
That's
I
right.
really didn't know. I mean, I already had respect for him before this episode or before the series.
Did you see Ex Machina?
Yeah, I didn't know he had this in him, though. I just thought it was absolutely incredible. And I would love to see some behind the scenes stuff on how he was able to shoot and switch between the different personas. And if it was all in one take, I have a hard time imagining it was one take, but if it was,
you feel like as somebody who's done some acting, I almost feel like he would have to, either shoot those scenes on separate days to get into the mindset and personality of each character. But if he can flip from one to the other, wow.
Yeah,
wow,
absolutely.
And that also shows, just as an aside, how in Star Wars he didn't really have anything to do. If this man is capable of bringing it with this kind of material, then anyway, but that's a whole other conversation. So let's dive into details now. I don't know if it's age or experience or overall geekiness, but all of us got spider sense about foreshadowing. So if you're gonna use foreshadowing as a device in your content, we're gonna sniff it out, and it's gonna be the lines around the head, and bloop, the spider sense is gonna be tingling. So when you open your show with a flashback, that's the first sign. And like, whoop. The next sign is if there's water, because water in movies and TVs is never your friend, even if you're an alien. So there's that. Sometimes, especially if you're an alien.
Just ask M. Night Shyamalan.
Right. But number 3, you introduce a sibling. Lord have mercy. That means they're going to die. Period. Dot. The end. There's no other function for a little brother or a little sister in sci-fi or fantasy except to die.
Yeah, that's so many stories. Like character development. Someone has to die.
Especially in a flashback sequence. So when this episode opens, I know we didn't watch it together, but had we been together, I know we would all been like, uh-oh.
Here it comes.
We all know what that means. And then you introduce my least favorite element of all, caves. I don't understand why people don't want to stay out of caves, because it don't end well. When's the last time that ended well? It don't end well. Go ahead, man.
Well, I was going to say, and then the big old huge red siren is when a parent tells one of the children, take care of your brother/sister. It's like,
I'll be right back in horror.
Yeah,
I'll be right back, or like I'm 2 days out from retirement. Like, you're dead.
Yep, 2 days out from retirement.
Death.
Sci-fi. I'll be back in horror and take care of your little brother. That's a target.
Yep.
And can you hear that? That's the Grim Reaper laughing at y'all. So we all knew where that was going to go as soon as we saw it. So like I said, anyway, so I saw that. I was like, okay, all right, well, everybody's got to have a little Batman in them, I guess. See that happening. And then we flash again back to the hospital with the screams and the turret and the whole different thing. Now I alluded to this before, but I want to crystallize it now. Here it comes. Tarwet is a Joss Whedon character.
For sure.
She's there for snark. That's all she does. no matter what's going on in the situation, her dialogue is snarky response. So that's the first thing. There's nothing wrong with snark. I love.
Can I make a comment on that real quick?
Sure, go ahead.
I don't know if it's snark, but I understand what your point is. But I think what it is that it appeals to a different viewership, because I'm watching it, you're watching it, and you're seeing it one way. Meanwhile, my daughters are watching it, and my wife is watching it, and they love it. It's I love Tara White. I want to hug her, or this or that.
It's catty, it's pithy, it's urban, it's modern, and I get that because like Snark has like a level of aggressiveness to it.
Well, they thought she was cute too.
So. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like she's being cutesy, and we'll get into it because that's my problem. Like I don't want it cutesy.
Okay, so they're screaming, and are your brothers? Yes, no, well, kinda. Okay, so then she has to break down exactly that they are in fact in the afterlife, and Mark is like, well, I seem to remember getting shot, and he's like, oh no, you most definitely are dead. Don't make any mistake. And then so they go through kind of laying out some of what's going to happen in the episode in terms of the mythology of your afterlife journey. Now, for different belief systems and different faiths, that's different for everybody. So in this particular situation, she was the guide to the afterlife, because what is required of them is a balancing of the souls and a weighing of the souls and the hearts to be able to enter into the eternal rest, which is the
field of reeds.
Field of reeds. And so once you find that out, then you also know what's going to happen, because it's not going to be that easy, or else we wouldn't have an episode. So you knew that was coming. But also, here's the other thing, and then I'm going to throw it out to you guys just about the whole opening thing. Also, here's the other thing. We also then get another quick cut to Dr. Harold's office. And then we have to ask ourselves again, how much is real? How much is imagined? How much, where is the line of reality here? Which is, again, good, but it kind of made me feel like this is going to be too much to try to wrap up in 2 episodes. But, I could be wrong. I'm just talking about how I felt. So we get, cut back there. And here's the thing, almost a 95% chance that it was actually Jake Lockley in Ascendance in those scenes. And we just thought it was Mark. And they skipped a little part where, the eyes roll in the back of the head when the personalities change. But the way Mark was behaving was off, and it was much more like Jake. So it could have been our first real look at Jake.
That's an interesting thought.
Right. So yeah. So now you guys tell me what you think about all that. We're talking about all the stuff in the opening, the foreshadowing with the brother and the mother. Take care of your little brother. It's all your fault. So we know where that was going. With the screaming with Tarot and her kind of character, and then also the very real possibility that was Jake. Start with Nims.
Yeah, I do think Jake did show up, but I think he only showed up once. I think and I got to remember, it's later on in the episode, there's a scene when, and once again, I got to give credit to Oscar Isaac, but it's in the eyes. There is a scene where, Mark is I think it's Mark most of the time, or Steven, and they're confused and everything, but there's one time when Jake does show up, and it's at the end, and it's where I think he threatens to kill the doctor, and it's in the eyes, and it's in the aggression and the attitude and everything, and I think it's very apparent that this is a third persona. It's definitely a different person, and I think you could argue it for Jake, but that one definitely is someone completely different. It is not Mark or Steven. As far as the whole intro and everything with that, and the foreshadowing and the flashbacks, it was just tough to watch. Like you said, definitely red flags going up everywhere. I already knew, you could tell where they were going to go with it. And then, to me, that also sets up the red flags, is that you know that something bad is going to happen with his relationship, and it's going to end up leading to his mental illness, you know. And when we get to that part, I'll talk a little bit more about, you know, kind of why that was so powerful for me. But I just thought that was incredibly well done. But huge alarm bells going off everywhere. That here is the MoonKnight origin story, you know, the Mark Spector, Stephen Grant origin story coming right here. And I think the most interesting thing that came out of this is the foreshadowing in this opening scene that Stephen Grant's position in this relationship is not what he thinks it is. And this is going to be one of the major revelations of this episode. And I look forward to when we get there, is that Stephen Grant is going to have, you know, a proverbial come to Jesus moment of where exactly he stands in the pecking order and how he came into existence. And talk about a surreal moment, you know, to come to believe, you know, what he's going to come to find out about his origins and who he really is, you know, and we're going to talk about that, I'm sure. So,
yeah, he goes full Buzz Lightyear.
Yeah. It really is. You knew, I didn't know if they were going to do it, but I had you knew it had to happen at some point where somebody's going to have to realize what their situation is. And that is going to be an awful hard thing to accept, because they're two separate, distinct personalities. And then to find out that you are not the alpha is going to be hard to come to grips with. So.
All right, Bracy, what do you think about all the opening stuff we talked about?
Whew, that's a big chunk of pie to digest. And now that you've got me thinking about something I had not picked up on, and so like my mind's kind of like trying to catch up with that particular revelation. But now thinking upon it, I think I can see it. Like you said, there's a subtlety about the eyes and the way he's talking to the doctor when he picks up the weapon and he's like, yeah, you know, I'm just going to go, and he's very threatening. It doesn't sound like Mark, but I was taking that as to Mark having a breakdown. But now thinking back on that, because we have a point made when, you know, Mark will see his room of death, his victims, and he's very solemn about this. He doesn't take death lightly. But what does he do when he finds out they're on this ship in the Duat, and, you know, there's a hippo goddess over there? It's like, well, you know, we could kill her and just take the boat. That doesn't sound like Mark Spector. On reflection, it does not sound like Mark. It sounds like something that maybe Jake, because we've seen in the previous episodes, whenever Jake pops up, he has way less compunction about killing than Mark does. I feel like Mark does it as a means of survival. And we'll find out by the end, Jake is a stone cold, cold-blooded killer. Yeah, he has no problem taking people out, no matter what the circumstance, armed, unarmed, at threat, not a threat. He has no problem at all. And his first thought is the most expedient. Oh, we kill the guys, we take the boat, we're good. And then he even tries to like play it off as like, hey, I'm just saying, if Layla's here, she'd agree with me. So you know that Jake has popped up in Layla's life without her knowing it either. Just
right.
Taking that as some aspect of Mark's personality at the time. So that's a tremendously intriguing thought, and it almost makes me want to go back and rewatch the series and see how many times I can spot Jake popping up. Is it earlier than when we first thought about it? Because if that's the truth, well done, people. Very subtle, very well planned, very well staged. And I like that kind of thing. I like when people do things like that. That's why I enjoy films like Memento and other films where you have to pay attention to the subtleties of what's going on. It's very clever. So yeah, I really dig that. I do like the interaction between Steven and Mark, as I said, and getting into seeing his home life and seeing what a rock his father was, and probably the only thing that kept him relatively sane. And there's a conflict. Any of us who have grown up with a parent who's had significant issues, there is a definite dichotomy you sometimes you hate them, but you always love them. And I can appreciate the fact that the schism for Mark is when his mother dies, because despite everything, despite leaving home, despite all the abuse, deep down, that's still his mom. He still loves her. He still wants her to love him. And that's the thing that breaks him. And I can appreciate that from, well, I won't get too deep into that. But I can appreciate where that went. So that was very impactful. Yeah, because it's a tough thing to deal with when you got a parent who's got significant problems, and you're trying to figure out as a child, you're trying to come to grips with that and how you handle that. So this episode struck home for me in a very relevant way. And once again, Oscar Isaac is absolutely amazing. And now, just to lighten the tone a little bit, I would like to throw it back to, even though she's not in this episode, Layla's, the actress's acting abilities, because I forgot to say this last time, and I want to be pithy. An actress who can actually cry on command, unlike some people who were on a witness stand not too long ago.
Oh, shots fired.
Oh,
Shots
Mira
fired.
sinking to the depths of the trench.
Oh, okay, so
just real quick, if I could, I didn't know we were covering the whole thing with the parents and everything. I do have to say, one of the things that really struck me, I've unfortunately been around, both as a kid and older, people who have lost children, and in one case because of the fault of another child. And the anguish is always, it's just
palpable.
Yeah. It is incredible. It is an incredibly difficult thing for just friends to get through, let alone the immediate family. And so watching that, it rang incredibly true. And that's one of the reasons why this episode was so powerful for me. And then you had the abuse that came out of it. It was hard to watch. I watched it a couple times. It was hard for me to watch and get through. But I think that's a sign. I was impressed by that, and it was incredibly adult. And incredibly well done. I think the drama. So I really wanted to make sure I mentioned that, because I think that it put a spotlight on something that does happen, and it put an authentic spotlight on it, because thank God that I've never had to go through anything with that with my own family, but I've been around it, and just being around it was heartbreaking. So.
And also, there are situations where if you're going to treat something, you have to first acknowledge it. Now, I have been privy to situations where there's no acknowledgement of what's really going on, and that's a whole nother roller coaster.
Yeah.
Because you can't begin to heal until you can first put your finger right on, this is the issue. If we're dealing with something that's spiritual, if we're dealing with something that needs medication, if we're dealing with something that needs counseling, if we're dealing with something where we need isolation from other people because of whatever. I mean, there's different levels of whatever. But the one thing that can be agreed upon is you got to acknowledge it.
Absolutely.
And if you're not there yet, that's a whole different mountain to climb. And that's why sometimes, as evidence in this show, you see adults way into their adult years still dealing with trauma that happened. I think it was Julia Roberts that said your childhood is something you spend the rest of your life trying to get over. And when I first heard that, I was like, but now I'm like, yep, she was on it, because it's so true. And so that part of this whole thing rings true on a human level, that if you didn't go through that particular circumstance, you've been exposed to by living some circumstances where you have things in the family that must be dealt with, and then you have the conflict of loving someone, yet maybe not understanding why they do what they do, or there's been injury or harm, or God help you if there's been actual death. because what do you do then? How do you process?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, a lot of that is clearly well written, well acted, and well conveyed because we all felt it, no matter what your personal experience is.
Absolutely.
So once again, I'll just reiterate, we just needed some more time. Needed some more time with these characters and needed some more time to deal with that because as the revelation comes on later in this episode, it puts a completely different spin on why Mark and Steven are who they are and the way they are, and it changes everything. And it is really one of the strengths of Marvel. Now, I know I'm overgeneralizing, and I've been on Twitter too long because I know people nitpick everything you say,
Mhm.
and they nitpick it down to dots of I's and crosses of T's. So that's how I know I've been on Twitter too long. But anyway, overgeneralizing, DC has always been about heroes that were larger than life, and the secret identity was to kind of mask the power within. Marvel heroes have always been about regular, real people with real problems that got powers.
Mm-hmm.
Lives didn't get better as a result of those powers. Just a completely different approach. And I
Right.
think none of that is any more evident than here in this MoonKnight series. So once again, we got to give them kudos on that because that is well done throughout all the episodes. And so, yeah. So moving on from all that, because that was a lot, we get to where we spend, as far as I'm concerned, too much time. But anyway, Terawet, again, welcomes them to the realm of the Duat, tells them that they're very much dead. And once again, I heard all that stuff you said, Emerson. It feels like Charlie Brown snarked to me, wah, 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 when she talks. When she talks, I'm not thinking about the reactions like you said your wife and your kids had, or your daughter, whatever. When Terawet talks, to me, wah, 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 I'm like, okay, you need to go back to Whedon Land and hang out with Angel and Buffy them because that's where you belong. But anyway, so she's reading through her cards, which I thought was hilarious. And it was really cool, however, how she mentioned, because Mark said, is this the afterlife? And Tyrett said, it's an afterlife. And then she mentioned the ancestral plane from Black Panther.
Mm-hmm.
That was awesome.
Nice little drop.
Right, nice little drop, great tie-in. And once again, I don't want to get too deep into it, but when people are normally arguing their faith or their beliefs, they're normally arguing for their version of whatever it is that they're talking about. And so I always find that fascinating. I find those conversations fascinating because it is by definition a creation or projection of your mind, your experiences, your personality, your nature, and your nurture. And so you say, well, it's probably going to be like this. And that's coming through all your filters. My personal belief, and I won't get too deep into it, my personal belief is that it's none of what people imagine. My personal belief, and the reason I believe that is because there are things that happen in this life that you can't comprehend. So it's funny to me that people are trying to codify the next life when your spirit steps out of your body and trying to lock that down into a system, because I'm like, you can't figure out love. You can't figure that out in this life. You can't figure out why people are attracted to each other. You can't figure out why you put up with some stuff with some people. You can't figure that out. You can't make a love potion. You can't do none of that. So that's why it's funny to me. But that's just me. That's just me. So she's going through her cards, and this is what's going to happen. And you got to get your soul balance. They're on the soul train. Okay. So then, they're running through, and he opens the door, and now they're on the deck of the ship, and they're sailing on the sands of the desert, and it's about balancing the scales, and that's the underworld. And whenever I hear that word underworld, I have seen so many movies and studied so many religions and written so many books, I get a kaleidoscopic montage from that word. So I think about the Kate Beckinsale movies. I think about the Greek mythology. I think about Demeter and Hades and Persephone. I think about Tartarus, where some of the angels that sinned with Lucifer are chained up. I think about what in the Christian faith, what the underworld must have looked like before Christ and then after Christ, and what that even means. Because there's 4 words: there's Hades, the Sheol, the abode of the dead, which is a little bit of an oxymoron. It means that death ain't what we think it is. So that's why I enjoy this particular series, because it makes you think, or at least makes me think about all that. So while they're on this ride, and she's talking about the balancing of the scales on the soul boat, another trope that we are familiar with is that there's always a catch. We can't have a story if ain't no catch. So it's just a smooth ride, and we're gonna get on this Afterlife Uber. We're gonna go on over to the Sandy Fields, eat some
Afterlife
cornbread,
Uber.
and it's all good, cool. But you're like, oh no, and then she's like, well, if they don't get weighed right in the balance, I'm afraid I can't let you in. I was like, there's the catch. So we're watching that being set up, and I'm like, okay. And the other question, and I really, really want to hear what you guys have to say about this, because it's along the lines of what we talked about before. This is what really jumped out at me. And again, I'm quick to admit my biases because I've been on Twitter too long. I'm quick to admit my biases. I know I got filters, but I admit them. And contrary to popular belief, I don't think I'm right about everything. I just state what I have to say with confidence and clarity. But that don't mean I think I'm right about everything. I'm just confident about what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what jumped out at me. And I want to hear what you guys thought.
Okay.
Here it comes. How in the world do you measure a balanced heart? What's the criteria? Because she said your heart got to balance out in life or you can't go to the field of rest. And the first thing I thought of was balance how? So is it like I balance my love with my hate? Or I balance my good deeds with my bad deeds? Or I balance my good motives with my bad motives? Or like, how? Did I have forgiveness in my heart when I died? Did I have evil in my heart? How? So she talked about the what. But what I wanted to know was the how. If the catch is you got it on the soul boat, you got to balance your heart. How? Does that mean I put as much salt and pepper on my salad? Is that what that mean? It just tripped me out because I was like, the ultimate test of life that sucks like an earthworm after the rain is if you don't know. So you get to the afterlife on the soul boat. She's like, you got to balance your heart. You're like, okay, wait a minute. Y'all didn't tell me that while I was alive.
Yeah.
Y'all telling me that now. Now that we out here all on the sands and I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to this version of heaven or not, if I'm going to die in the sand and all that. Now you telling me that I have to have a balanced heart and a balanced soul. According to who? According to you? What's the criteria? Where's a list? At least God gave Moses 10 commandments. At least he said, do this, don't do that. But here, right, you already dead on the way to the party. And it's like, so I want to hear what you guys think about that, because that's the stuff that jumped out at me. I mean, it just jumped out at me. So I definitely want to hear your thoughts. Start with Nims.
Yeah, the thing for me, and this was one of my problems with the episode. I mean, it's not a huge problem, but it's definitely a geeky, dirty problem. Was they're doing all of this to follow Egyptian mythology, and obviously, as we've seen with Thor, just because they're using the name of something doesn't mean they're going to actually follow the mythology. But none of this has been set in stone. So it's like, why did you have to change this so much from what the actual mythology is? First of all, Tawet is a goddess of love. She shouldn't be guiding anybody on this boat. That would be
should be Anubis.
Else. Yeah, and
it should be Anubis on the boat,
and then it should be Osiris waiting for them. Yep. He's the one that judged the souls, and he sits in a throne room, and that's where the balance of scales is, and the feather of truth. And then Amet would be sitting there, and then if you didn't balance,
gobble you up.
Yeah, he would devour you, or she would devour your soul. So. Right there, I'm like, well, why is this all changed? And why have they added all of this? And then the whole concept of balancing your soul, I agree with you, absolutely. It's like, you've got to explain that, because it has become so central in the series that you have to explain what does that exactly mean, because Harrow has been dooming souls prematurely to the Duat to die for not being balanced before they're even dead. So it's like you've got to know what, in this sense, I mean, they're departing from mythology, and you could go back and read about what the Egyptians thought you were supposed to do, to have a good life. But this is a completely different thing. You have to establish that. You have to establish why some people are balanced and other people aren't balanced, and why Mark Spector, who is a killer, is balanced once he comes to terms with all the things in his life. What does that mean? Does that mean that once you go through therapy, you get to advance, off the soul boat and into the afterlife, into the field of reeds? And what is going on here? But I think the more geeky thing was, why did you change the Egyptian afterlife, the Egyptian mythology, to give us this aspect, complete with, I think it's terrifying enough to have a crocodile goddess eating you, or a half crocodile goddess eating you if you don't balance out, and to have some aspect of that at the end with Osiris judging you and everything. But suddenly you have to turn it into kind of a zombie movie. I mean, it just felt kind of contrived and hollow and made for TV moment, where it's like, oh, we get to show off our graphics and have the sand people come up and come to get you, and 28 days later, they're coming to get you, and you turn into sand and everything. So it just didn't feel, for something that had such gravitas, and in a lot of ways was following Egyptian mythology. The times when they decide to depart from it were really kind of jarring for me. So, and this was one of those times, so it just didn't feel right necessarily. I did think it was cute when she read the cards. I laughed, I giggled at that. But yeah, the whole concept of the whole balance, and I couldn't agree with you more. It's like, okay, if they've got to balance the hearts, I understood why they were out of balance, because it's two separate people. But once they came to terms with who they are, eventually, and we're going to probably talk about all the different things they had to come to grips with, why was the imbalance now? Because it's still Mark Spector, killer. Mark Spector, amoral guy. Mark Spector, who married the woman whose father he killed. It's like, so what are we using to judge this life? Because right now I'm at a loss, because I don't see a particularly good life here. So
that's what I'm saying. I just really wanted more clarity. I don't believe that Vader throwing the Emperor in the shaft made up for Anakin killing them kids.
Nope.
He ends up being a Force ghost at the end. I guess your heart has to turn back to the light side. I guess it's not about your deeds, I guess. But I never believed that should have earned Anakin a ticket to the Jedi afterlife. Honestly. But that's just me.
But especially, I guess the last thing I would say, though, is that, at least in that sense, you're saying, okay, well, now he's following this path. But in a afterlife where you're actually having physical scales that are weighing, I mean, that's almost like saying that you have to balance out good with bad. And here is a guy who's got an entire room full of people he's killed. It's like,
but they were all bad people.
Okay. And there's before I throw it to Bracy, there's another thing. I don't know the root of this trope, but it's another one, I guess, my experience, because my co-hosts are going to know exactly what I'm talking about as soon as I say it. Here it comes. It's the Butterfly Effect movie with
Richard Gere.
Ashton Kutcher.
Oh, okay.
You can't get it right until you sacrifice somebody you love or what you love the most.
Yeah,
you got to get hurt. You got to get devastated. So the thing you love the most, or your deepest, darkest secret, is something that hurts you the most. All of a sudden, when that is exposed, or that is not going to happen, or that person dies, like Christine with Doctor Strange and What If. When you do that, then all of a sudden the universe leaves you alone. Come on now. It's like that always amazes me. And so that's what I felt like happens here. We'll get to that in a minute. But that's what I felt like happens here, in terms of your balance once you tell each other the truth, or once you face this different kind of thing, or once you something you care about deeply got to die. Then the universe is like, all right, well, I guess you're a good person now, so off to the, Field of Dreams with you, Kevin Costner, y'all be playing baseball, y'all be all right. Okay, Bracy, what do you think about this whole balancing the heart thing and the soul boat and just that whole thing?
Yeah, first things first, I didn't mind the sand zombies because we did need some action. It is a superhero show. So that was cool. And I also thought it was cool that the sand zombies in particular were people that Mark had killed. I thought that was a nice touch. Since we'd gotten a little view of them in the hospital scene. So that's nice. And let's face it, we hadn't lacked action, but we have been lacking MoonKnight for 2 episodes. And this was the most narrative heavy episode of them all, perhaps maybe more or less on par with the first episode. So it was good to have a little bit of action in there. So I didn't mind that so much. I'm with you, Nim. I don't like them playing with the mythology so much. Obviously, Marvel, DC, whoever's working on a property. I've certainly done it myself in my own. I'm not 100% stickler for mythology when I'm writing my own fiction. If I'm writing fiction in a superhero comic book world, I do play with things. And so I see that, Thor mythologically is not a blonde. He is a bearded, redheaded, almost dwarfishly proportioned giant warrior. He's super thick and super stocky. So, he doesn't look like Chris Hemsworth at all in the mythology. So there's that. And so I can wrap my head around Thawet being the driver of the boat, even if that doesn't make sense. What I don't like is the fact that every other aspect of the gods we've seen so far, whether it was talking third person or whether we see them as we see Khonshu or later on as we see Ammit, has this sense of authority and command and presence in them. And Thawet is like, oh, hi, I'm your guide, and here's my little cards. I'm glad you guys love the cards. I hated the cards. I was like, that's just like, oh, God, that's just one more thing I can't stand. Disney-fied the crap out of her. Yeah.
Thawet is the Minnie Mouse of Egyptian mythology.
Oh.
In this instance, yeah. I mean, so she's the greeter. It's like, welcome to the Duat, everyone. Now over to the left is Eternal Damnation. Ahead of us is Paradise. Only if your heart's bound. So you've got all that sort of silliness going on. I understand it's the palate cleanser. I understand that as a story maker, a creator of narratives. One of the most fun transitions I've ever seen is you see in Bram Stoker's Dracula, they behead Lucy. Van Helsing beheads Lucy after they stake her. In the very next shot is a knife plunging into a steak as he's cutting it up. It's like, yeah, a good night's work. It's like, and these 3 guys have just lost the women they love. He's like, and you almost wait for him to go like, what? Is the steak not good here? And so that was a funny little tension breaking moment. But I didn't like it here. There's other ways you could handle it, but I guess with Steven, because Steven's role in this episode really shifts quite a bit. He's far less the comic relief. He really comes into his own as a character in a way that he hasn't before. And so I understand that they had to make something else funny. I just don't necessarily agree with it. I was okay with the episode being more serious. Perhaps that's just my adult sensibilities. Yeah.
Here's a quick question for you. And this is, I will 100% agree or stipulate that I'm doing the work of the show here, but they say that this is an afterlife, and we see that Mark has created the whole mental asylum and everything. Who is this? Is it possible that his view of Thawet and being all cartoony and greedy and nice and everything is the childish Steven's projection of what the goddess looks like in his head?
I could buy into that if we didn't have her in the next episode.
Okay.
If she didn't interact with another character and
talking to Layla,
she uses the same sort of tonality, attitude, all the stuff that we see her express here, we see expressed with Layla later on. So I would be on board with that otherwise. Now, speaking on that, that is very interesting to me that Mark has envisioned this thing, which is actually to help him balance his soul, even if he doesn't know it. Even putting his enemy in there, and his enemy is literally trying to help him. What does Harrow say? Is like, you've got to open up to Stephen, which is what he has to do to balance his soul. So, all these things are here in his life. So, I guess that's part of the journey through the duet. If you have an unbalanced soul, this is your last chance to kind of balance yourself before you reach the end. Which, to DT's point, is a strange way to approach the afterlife, if you will. I've got a journey of X amount of time to kind of sort myself out before I get judged. And this goes back to when we were talking about Harrow. It's like, okay, how do you judge who should live, who should die? What metric are you being judged by? Like, oh, you commit some sort of sin in the future. We don't know that. It's not defined. It's just like, again, Thor's hammer. Who's worthy? Okay, it's worthy by Odin's idea of what worthiness is. What's Odin's idea of worthiness?
And
so
what
we
is
have
that?
all that.
Right.
Exactly. It's not like, going back to our own faith here. It's very explicit in the Bible. We can never be worthy. We have to have an advocate to find our way into paradise, because even if you live a completely physically righteous life, he says, like, if you hated, you committed sin in your heart. If you lusted, you committed adultery in your heart. There's all these things. So no one in Christianity can get there on their own merit, and that's the point, that we can't do it on our own heart, and that we need Jesus. So I can understand why this is so hard for you, because we come from this background where we have things that are very clearly defined in black and white. This is the way. And so when you're doing this fictionalized thing, you do kind of like, like, that doesn't make sense. This guy, he still killed a lot of people. Yeah, it was for Khonshu. But, he said he was killing bad guys, but, he accidentally got his brother killed. Like, how's that all factor in? And, there's people he didn't mean to kill because he has a third personality. He just kills whoever. And it becomes a problem. Just like, now, as a Christian, I do believe in redemption. But as a writer, I believe that people have to pay. And it's a different sort of thing, because, like, when I see Darth Vader has to die. Now, he is redeemed in a way. I don't necessarily think we should see him as a Force ghost, but he at least, by his actions, saves the galaxy, if not his own soul. He saves his son, if not his own soul. So that's why I have a... Yeah.
I think you just hit on a plot hole in the story, though, too. Is that...
Well, I've always had this issue, like, Dark Phoenix should not be brought back. Jean Grey shouldn't be brought back. She killed, like, 4.5 billion people. Hal Jordan should never be back because he killed we don't know how many Green Lanterns with his actions. Those are things that you just don't get over in fiction, even though I do believe completely 100% in redemption up to the moment of your last breath. In fiction, I'm a much harder taskmaster. I think those scales should be balanced in a particular sort of way.
What's the plot hole, man? What's the plot hole?
If the schism between Mark and Steven is what's causing the souls not to balance, I think it's pretty clear that it is. Well, it's fine that Mark and Steven reconcile, but there's a third part of this soul
who's not
that didn't
there.
come into balance. So how did the souls, the scales balance?
Unless, like you said, even though we saw the sarcophagus, you feel like there are moments that you see Jake. So maybe he is there, even though he doesn't have to play a part in their dichotomy, because Jake's not in balance. Jake is who he is, and there's no problem with Jake being who he is. I think that's why Jake can operate separately. But the larger problem here is, if you're presenting Moon Knight as a force of good and Amit as a force of evil, clearly that is not the Egyptian equation for right or wrong or balance. Good and evil don't play into this. It's about a balance of your soul.
You see, that's okay. See, again, that's what I want to have.
We don't know what that is.
Well, that's why I want to have this discussion, because there are so many different perspectives, because of that what you just said is, again, based on the perspective of the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Khonshu's idea of good or evil, Amit's idea of good or evil, our idea, Mark's idea. Those are not all synonymous. And I also want to throw this point out. There's a difference because, we're talking about Vader a lot. There's a difference between feeling remorse and making amends.
Yeah.
Because, Jeff, what you just talked about, I talk about it all the time.
Repentance.
Well, yes, but that thing you just talked about when you mentioned Jordan and Coast City and all the Lanterns he killed and Vader and all the kids and the other ones that you mentioned. That's what we call in writing a point of no return decision.
Yeah.
What that means is that once you do that, or like Jean Grey, the name of the issue was, Phoenix must die, because that was right. And then at the end, Jean realized it herself. She's like, okay, I see that I'm going to zone out. This is like a Hulk thing. I see that.
It's the opposite side. It's the opposite side of what you said with the butterfly effect. That in order for you to balance, you have to sacrifice. You have to give up something. And in fiction, I believe that is the case.
You have to give up something you love.
Yeah, you have to give up something incredibly important. Jean and Vader, they have to give up their life. They have to give up the future plans they had. I was going to marry Scott. I was going to have children. Vader's like, oh, I have a chance to, maybe have my son by my side, who I've never had by my side. He gives up all of that to save him. You got to have that, because part of that journey is also a catharsis. You have to give that to your audience as well, which is why I have a much higher standard in terms of fiction, because we are playing to an audience as opposed to the spiritual life that we have outside in the real world.
I would say, and this is somewhat of a tangent, but there's certain characters that should never be able to be redeemed. Case in point, the Joker. I mean, you could look at the Killing Joke and feel bad for his circumstances all you want and hard luck and the cards he was dealt by life. But after a certain point, once you do enough stuff, it's like, well, I don't care what your circumstances were. You're never coming back from that.
There's a great line Thomas Ferris wrote in the first novel that introduced Hannibal Lecter. He was a side character. He wasn't the main character. And when I forget the name of the psychologist, William, I think, who's like who's looking into the family man who's killing off all these families. And he discovers his origins, and he says, like, oh my God, I feel so bad for him. Like, this is awful. And the detective's like, you feel sorry for this piece of crap? It's like, I feel sorry for the child who was made into this monster. He says, I do not feel sorry for the monster, but I feel sorry for who he was. Now, I'm going to take the monster down, but looking at his origin, it's like you said, we can feel bad for the Joker to an extent, but we can never forgive him.
And at least with Hannibal, he had a code, which was he said he ate bad people. It doesn't excuse what he did.
Yeah, this wasn't even the Hannibal. He was talking about the killer of the family man who was wiping out families.
Oh, in Red Dragon?
Yes, because when he's discussing him, he's like, I see the things that made him what he is, and I weep. He, internally he wept for that child, knowing the horrors that must have been subjected to twist a child into a monster of this caliber. But it's like when your loved one becomes a vampire. It's like, honey, I love you, but I can't have you run around sucking everybody's blood.
Yeah.
It's got to be done. You got to shoot the werewolf you love with the silver bullet. It's all the same thing.
Or a Walking Dead zombie. I mean, that was Morgan's problem. He couldn't kill his wife, and then his wife ended up taking his son out eventually. Spoiler alert. But anyway, see, that's what I'm talking about when I say that's why this perspective is so fascinating to me, because, for example, which will help me transition into our next little segment. When Mark meets his victims, his response is, they're the worst of the worst. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it's an unsolvable problem. When I listen to people, because I've lived long enough to see that human beings have the same fight in every generation. So that means we don't learn nothing. That means that you can live, no matter how long you live, we're going to have the same fight. We're still fighting about racism. We're still fighting about capital punishment. We're still fighting about what kind of drugs are good, what kind of drugs are not. We're still fighting about what kind of sex is okay, what kind of sex is not. We have the same fight. They might have on a different clothes for the generation, but that means human beings don't learn nothing. That means God put us on a hamster wheel. You just go spin and spin and spin and accomplish nothing if you don't know the lore, because we keep having the same fights because we can't solve the problems. So that's why there's a lot of arguments I don't engage in, because people keep saying, if we can just get our guy in office. And what you don't understand is that that's going to solve some problems. That's going to solve the problems that you care about.
Yeah.
And then the other side is going to say, well, we need to get our guy in office. That's going to solve some problems you care about. And we just keep going round and round and round. So it's a hamster wheel. So saying that, I mean, when Mark is saying he killed the worst of the worst, and when Khonshu says you'll be the instrument of my vengeance, you'll be the fist of Khonshu, you'll be my justice and my judgment, it's always a nebulous thing to me as to where the line is, because I don't know. I'm just a man. I'm just clinging breath.
Let me throw this out there.
I know where my lines are, but I don't know where the line is.
Do you believe Mark in that room?
That he's the worst, that he just killed the worst?
No, it sounded like rationalization to me.
Yeah. That all those people in there were people he killed on behalf of Khonshu?
No.
Because what's the very next thing he says? He says, like, I kept wishing one of them would take me out instead.
Yeah. And why? And then Steven goes, why is there a child in there? So they're not all the worst of the worst, because one of the people that was in there was his brother.
Right.
So how many people were in there that he killed before he ever went to work for Khonshu?
But see, and that brings up another interesting point, which is slightly tangential, but not fully tangential. And that is that, how can I say it? There are certain things that come along with a world and a culture and a subculture. And what people still are trying to pull off is that you can step in it, but not get everything to come along with it. You can't be an assassin and all of your kills were just the next Hitler, the next Dahmer, the next John Wayne Gacy. Not all the people you killed was that. No, they weren't. And that's what Mark is trying to assert, that, they're all the worst of the worst. And I'm like, the worst of the worst in whose eyes?
The greatest movie that deals with that is Grosse Point Blank. Where
excellent
Martin Gross or Martin Blank tries to tell himself that if I come to your door, you probably did something to deserve it. And then he has to come to the realization that he did it because he liked it,
Right.
Period.
And that's what I meant to say about the Killing Joke.
Always saying, it's not me.
I don't know if Alan Moore meant it. He probably did with the nature of his writing. Mm-hmm. But what Alan Moore did with the Killing Joke, which I think some people got and some people didn't, was that book proves that, no, Joker, you just crazy. The Joker's whole premise was that one bad day can drive anybody over the edge. So he gave Gordon that day with what he did to Barbara. Didn't drive Gordon over that edge, though. So by the book's end, you understand, no, Joker, you just crazy. You want to do all that called crazy in you. And so I'm saying that to say, when we're looking at, the Moon Knight as an instrument of vengeance, is that people Khonshu don't like? Is it people that are a threat to his homeland? Is it the people that are a threat to his pantheon? Is it people that are a threat to whatever Egyptian culture you come from?
Yeah. What exactly does the Travelers of the Night mean?
Right, that kind of thing.
This is what I was trying to hit on at the beginning when we were first talking about our thoughts, was that I think that this whole concept, this journey of discovery that Mark and Steven, to a degree, are going through, was the most interesting thing in this whole show. And that if they had done this whole show of them going through all these elements, and it was like 6 episodes of that with flashbacks of why he's dead, and then he comes back to life towards the end of the episode, it would have been a much deeper show.
So you really wanted an origin show.
Yeah, but it probably would have been confusing as all hell, too, because you really would have had to leave it nebulous. It's like, is he nuts? Is he in a mental institution? Right until the end, where you come to find out that, no, this is him trying to deal with the fact that he's a killer.
I don't think we could have done that. I think that would have been too reminiscent of WandaVision.
Okay.
But if we'd had that first, I think that would have worked.
But the one redeeming thing that we as an audience can see with Mark is that he has remorse and guilt, and that he may have killed out of necessity or order or to fulfill his bargain with Khonshu. But it wasn't out of joy of killing, as
No.
Yeah.
opposed to Jake.
But this
So
is
Jake don't care.
But I think that's what's so fascinating about this whole mental institution that he has conjured for himself. Is this is him coming to grips with his reality, and it's almost like his own self therapy. He is giving therapy to himself through his doctor's eyes, who is his enemy. I mean, when you start to peel back the layers of this onion, it just gets more and more interesting.
Yeah, and think about what that means. As we discussed an episode or two back, I said, like, each aspect of this personality is still the person. So even though, they act like they're two different people, they're still Mark Spector at the end of the day, which means Mark fell into the same pit as Harrow. Jake Lockley proves there's a part of Mark that enjoys it. And Harrow talks to, when he had the statue of Khonshu, he's like, I did enjoy dispensing your vengeance. So I think enough time with Khonshu kind of twists you into...
And once again, that rings absolutely true. And I'll let Jeff speak for himself, but for me, it's like I spent much of my youth training how to hurt people, how to fight, how to kill people. There's a part of me that liked it. I never did it. I never actually killed someone because I liked it, but I liked being able to do those things. I like fighting. My wife gives me a strange look because it's like, I miss it. I miss getting punched in the face. It made me feel good to be able to punch and punch other people.
I can say unequivocally, when I was training in martial arts all the time, and my wife, sometimes she'd come into the dojang and watch us work out, and she said, like, I couldn't watch you guys, like, especially when I was dealing with somebody who's like my equivalent, like, really big, really strong. And the two of us going at it, and to her, it must look like a UFC fight, that we're just wailing on each other. I mean, obviously, we didn't get hurt, not in any meaningful way, but there was a part of me that just loved the crap out of it, whether I was delivering it or whether I was getting it. I was in it.
And so I understand that whole conflict. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've talked to my priest about it when I was younger. I was like, this just doesn't seem to jive, with the whole love your neighbor thing. It's like, where am I at on the whole spectrum here? Because,
well, now that's a dispensation. There are plenty of people that got off in the Old Testament, either through direct judgment or when they were taking the promised land or when Pharaoh drowned. So that's not true. And that's my point.
No, I know. I'm just saying that was the conflict I was having, and I had to have that discussion, because it's confusing. It's like you got to wrap your mind around that.
Yeah, because like when you're playing with those big toys, you're like, oh man, it's gonna be cool to blow up a tank or whatever. It's like, and you don't think about the fact there's there's like 5 guys in that tank. Yeah. Well, I didn't see it.
And so whatever. And that brings up another point I want to hit, and then we're going to move forward. But also, in discussion of the characters we've been talking about, we're also talking about levels. So let's look at the amount of people that Mark Spector killed, or maybe Mark and Jake killed. And then let's go up another level to the amount of people that Anakin killed. All the Jedi he had killed, the Jedi children he killed. But since we're seeing now more and more content revealing the 20 years between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, how much more killing did Anakin do there? So then there's that level.
20 years of killing.
Right, 20 years of killing throughout the galaxy. But then now we'd have to go up to the Dark Phoenix level, where she killed like 4.5 billion.
Yeah.
Like she ate the sun, and all the Dabari died. They were talking about, Lalandra said, we got to answer the voices of 4 billion Dabari dead. I'll never forget that line out of the Burn Claremont run, because it just something about it rang with me. And I'm like, even if y'all killed Gene, them people still dead. What about them? What about their lives and their families? So what I'm saying is, that's what I mean. That's why, it's not a solvable problem by humans, I think.
No, you get to that.
And as I observe life, we keep arguing about problems that we can't solve. So that's what I mean. The only thing I can say with confidence is where my lines are. I recognize, however, that other people, systems, governments, face, generations are just as confident about where their lines are. And that's why it's not solvable by the hand of man. from my point of view. So as the brothers are going through the rooms and they're looking at all the zombies, looking at all the people, and then Mark sees a street, and Mark is like, it's just a street. And so we know that everything Mark says is a lie because Mark don't want a deal. And then, you know, there's a little boy, and then the scales of justice are swaying, and Stephen gets horrified, but Mark is like, no, yeah, they're the worst of the worst, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But Mark is showing remorse and guilt, and then Stephen is like, did you kill a child? And Mark is like, don't look at him, don't look at him. And then Stephen doesn't listen to that. Of course he doesn't. And then he chases the boy into a room, locks his brother Mark out. And then now all of a sudden, he's back in the family home and mama's at the grill. And now we got a little brother. And Mark does that thing where you tell your little brother, we're about to go do something dangerous. Don't tell mama, or, you know, and you have to come do it or else you're a punk. So your big brother gives you that kind of challenge, then you're going to go do it. And then he uses the phrase laters gators. And then also I want to talk about how there's lots of Easter eggs, because if you go back to episode 1 and you look at the fish tank, you can see the Gates of Osiris, the Khufu ship, Khonshu's temple in the aquarium. So again, that attention
picture on the wall with scales, all kinds of little things.
Yeah, that attention to detail is incredible. So they go to the cave, and Stephen follows the boys to the cave, and we already know what's going to happen. But I mean, as soon as I saw what was going to happen, I'm screaming. I'm like, no, whoop, whoop, on, and Will Roberts in danger. So they go into the cave, and it's like, you know, it starts to rain. I'm like, I done told y'all about water. But they go in the caves, and then here come the rain, and things starts flooding, and then he gets stuck. And I'm saying to myself, what a way to die. And what a way to watch your brother die, and you know that's your fault. And so anyway, so it's a bit of a montage of the mama showing up, and it's cutting back and forth between the boys, and then, you know, Mark having to face what happened, and then Mark, you know, showing what happened, and then they cut to the morgue. Lord have mercy, cut to the morgue, that scene in the morgue, and then, you know, the mama coming to grips, and the mama starts yelling, and she wants her Roro back, and, you know, mama's lashing out at Mark as he comes down the steps, and it's all your fault, and blah, blah, blah. And so also, for those of y'all that don't read comics, Randall Spector, the brother, grew up to become a supervillain in the comics. So it didn't happen the way it does in here, but, you know, the story is still good, just so you know. They're taking liberties with the story, but they're doing it well.
Yeah.
And so all this is going down, and then you see the aftermath. You see the birthdays that the mama refuses to celebrate with Mark, and only the dad celebrates. And the mama has done everything she can to punish him and shut him out. Mother's name is Wendy, and she's getting lit, and she's getting drunk, and she's trying to drink away her pain. And the reason this stuff is so poignant, and the reason this stuff is so, I don't know, strikes at the heart, is because it's so real. It's so three-dimensional. You've done it, or you've seen people try to drink their pain away. You've done it, or you've seen it. You've seen people lash out at someone because, again, there are certain situations based on the circumstances of that situation that cannot be undone. For example, if someone takes your virginity through rape, it doesn't matter how many times they tell you they're sorry. You can't get your virginity back. You can't undo what's been done. If your little brother is dead because you dared him to go into a dangerous cave and he drowned, wedged between, you know, two stalactites or whatever, you can't undo that. You can't even unsee it. If I know somebody who had car accident stuff and killed children through a car accident and a whole bunch of different stuff, and I'm just like, you can't undo that kind of stuff. And so even though the story and the characters are fictional, the emotions are real because you've been in it, or you know someone that's been through a point of no return decision, because you know what you do, your mind replays the scenario over and over and over and says, if I had just done this, if I had just zigged when I should have zagged, if I had just taken 2 seconds, if I had just done this, and it's something I incorporate in my life when I'm driving, when people around me are in a hurry, I just let them go because it's going to be 6 seconds out of my life.
Yeah.
And 6 seconds out of my life could save lives. I'm not going to drag race you down the street. You want to get to that light, you want to, go around me 20 miles an hour, that's okay. That's okay. I'll get there. It's not worth it. Because I understand stuff like this. Just in a few seconds, my father taught me that. My father taught me that when I first learned how to drive, my father said, it's not you that I don't trust, son. It's just so many fools out there. So you got to leave yourself margin for error. Don't just think about what you can do. Think about what somebody else might do in a moment of time. Do you have enough time to hit the brakes, recover? Can you turn? It changed the whole way I think about driving. And so that is the kind of stuff that was coming to my mind watching this whole thing, because you are going to replay that day until you get therapy, until you get healed, until you get it out, until you face it. You're going to replay that day. If only I hadn't dared my brother. If only we got to the caves and turned back. If only I'd maybe bought a floaty vest. Maybe it could have buoyed him up or put a wedge between him and I. We could have pulled him out. He wouldn't have been stuck. If only I had told someone what we were doing. If my father was there, he could have pulled him out because I wasn't sure. If only your mind is going to go through all that when something like that happens. And so that's what I mean when I say, even though the characters are fictional, even though we're watching a fictional story play out, those emotions are spot on. Those emotions are spot on. I remember watching, and I'm gonna throw it to you guys. I forgot what it was. It's I don't want to call the wrong name. I don't think it's Leif Garrett. It might be Leif Garrett. Anyway, there was a 70s or 80s actor, musical icon, and long story short, he got lit. He got in a car accident, and his best friend got crippled and is in a wheelchair. Was quadriplegic for life.
Not
And
sure
so,
if that was Leaf.
he went to visit him, and he talks about him, and I just couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine either family. I couldn't imagine if you're the dude that was driving and your best friend didn't die, but kind of like Obi-Wan and Anakin. Like, he didn't die, but he'll never be what he was, and now he's turned into something else because of you. Now, in this case, the accident wasn't because of the passenger, obviously, but I'm saying living with that kind of thought, and if you're the person in the wheelchair and you have to look at the person that took away your life in that way, and now you've got a different life because of their carelessness, not yours. And so that kind of stuff is real, it's tangible, it's palpable, and it came through in watching this. So I want to hear what you guys think about everything about them, running through the hallway and the revelations about what happens to Randall and the reactions of the mom and the dad and all that. So tell me about all that. Nims, you start.
Yeah, I think the thing that got me and looking at social media was that people, there's 2 points that I wanted to make, and then I'll hand it over to Jeff. The first was about the mom. People are attacking her as a monster, and what she did was monstrous. But I think that you need to understand that people react to things differently, and this was a woman that needed help. She needed serious help because she could not deal with the grief and deal with the fact that she still had to serve. I mean, there's a whole host of things we could put on her, and it was so powerful, but it's like this was a woman who was destroying another part of her that, because she could not come to grips with what had happened and the anger and the rage and the grief. She never went through the stages of grief, to be honest with you. She needed help. Yeah. And so you see all these people who were talking about how she's a monster. No, she wasn't a monster. She was a woman that was put through something that was absolutely horrible, who needed help and did a lot of monstrous things. And unfortunately, it just destroyed not only her family, probably her relationship with her husband, but it also hurt her child, her surviving child, quite severely, So I thought that was incredibly powerful, hard to watch, and incredibly true. Incredibly true. It just rang true all the way through. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that. The other part was, are we coming to grips with the realization where Mark realizes who he is? So the actual moment when the first dissociative moment that or not Mark, Steven, the first dissociative moment that Mark has. Are we talking about that yet? DT?
No, we're getting there. Or?
Yeah.
We're getting there.
Okay, so we're not at that point yet?
No, not quite, but
okay. So I will leave that. So yeah, that was the biggest thing that I want to talk about. Like going through the hallways and everything. Like I said, I think this is really Mark's trying to cope with the realities of his life, and maybe that's what balancing the scales means. I don't think it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but maybe coming to grips with the truth. The feather of truth is coming to grips with the whole truth of who you are and what you were. I mean, I think that leaves a lot of gray area for dubious people, but who am I to judge an afterlife? So but yeah, just the last thing is that whole series of things, like I said, just rang incredibly true, and it was heartbreaking to watch. It was like this was a family that needed an intervention. They needed someone to just it was just bad. It was really hard to watch, but incredibly riveting and powerful at the same time. So not much else I could say.
And I want to point out before we go to Bracy is that WandaVision had a completely different tone, because WandaVision justified Wanda all the way through, and this MoonKnight does not. So go ahead, Bracy, that whole sequence.
I'm glad you said that, the feather of truth, because I hadn't thought about that, because that's what that was all about. So again, we're trying to understand how the mind of a 6,000-year-old God works in terms of what their criteria is. It's the same thing for trying to figure out how a 5,000-year-old Viking God decides who's worthy and who's not. So interesting ideas there. Definitely interesting ideas. So the feather of truth is not the feather of good. It's the feather of truth, feather of balance. It kind of makes me think of the old Sword of Shannara series by Terry Brooks. Some interesting parallels there about facing the truth and the consequences for good or ill for a character of that. This is tough. And like I said, this resonates with me. I had a parent who had some problems, and it's tough to deal with, And then it wasn't until I was an adult I understood what was behind all that. I was like, man, if only I'd known. Maybe I could have said something or done something. I could have been a help in some way. But as a child, you're mostly kept out of the loop. You're not told, and at the time, maybe not everybody even understands what's going on or why. And that's incredibly tough to deal with. And I'm obviously a very imaginative person as an artist. But I'm glad I was not so imaginative that I had the need to break myself into many other people, because I can see how people do that. And even though I know we'll get into it, that Mark will tell Steven is like, you were made not to see that. It was like, so he could have a piece of himself that did have a regular life, and that's. Man, that stabbed me right in the heart. I had an experience one time where I was talking to my mom. I said, I wish Dad throw, we'd get out and throw the football like we used to. And she was like, "You've never done that." I was like, "What?" She's like, "Yeah, I remember. He used to toss the football with me." She says, "No, you have never in your life done that." And that blew me away, because I was like, holy crap. I created a false memory of something that I wanted, something that I saw other kids doing. And that just blew me away to have that realization. So, you look at Mark Spector, and depending on what's going on in your life, yeah, and I know the Joker got disproved with his theory, one bad day, but it takes more than one day to get there, but you have enough bad days, you might get there. And to think that I was like, God knows, I could have been on a bizarre journey like Mark Spector, thinking about growing up and dealing with a lot of anger over things that were going on because I was confused and I didn't understand. There's that whole love-hate relationship. And so, like I said, this just hit me to the core. It made me make several different changes and decisions in my life to try and steer myself away from that, to become somebody different, to become somebody better. And it was not easy. So watching this, like I said, this particular episode like hit hard for that reason.
You never know what that trigger moment is going to be. Either.
No, you don't. You don't. And like fortunately / unfortunately for me, what if I got into the military and gone down the road Mark Spector had? I had a moment where I lashed out at one of my younger brothers. I'm the oldest brother, and I also thought about as the older brother, yeah, you do dare your brothers to do stuff, and you can get them into trouble, and trouble that can be, pretty bad. We used to jump off the roof, like, oh, come on, jump off, you wussy, It's only 10 feet. What's wrong with you? It's not a big deal. You could have broke both the stupid legs, all kinds of stupid things you do when you're kids. But, I hurt one of my brothers. Not seriously, but I hurt him enough that it scared my mom. And it scared me. And that was my moment. That's what diverted me away. So, yeah, just seeing somebody, and I think all of this is part of what gave me the drive to kind of want to understand what made people tick. And to witness, and again, I got to give it to Oscar, man. Playing this wounded, fractured, tortured person, and what that means for the story, and the fact that Khonshu picked him when we see his little memory of how he came to be. When Khonshu says, you're full of pain and you're broken, you're worthy because you're broken, because you can be manipulated, because you can be used. And Stephen, because he's outside of all of that, he recognizes that. And that's when he starts trying to console Mark and says, this isn't your fault, man.
So,
I mean, it took some balls for Disney to go here.
To write.
So, hats off. I can forgive all the silly Billy stuff with Towet just because of how powerful this episode was.
I will say this. I'll just get on, if I get on a mini soapbox for a second. Mm-hmm. Our country's going through a lot of stuff right now, with a lot of things, shootings and stuff. Just because people are successful or present a certain way doesn't mean that they haven't dealt with things that we've all dealt with. Everybody has traumas. Yeah. It's like, and I think that I wish Disney would use this and launch this to give a greater awareness of mental health and destigmatize mental health, because I think this is a perfect example of what can be done to show that even a superhero can have mental health problems, and it's like, it could be a campaign, because people need to go away and get help when they need it,
and for the people who were like ripping on Mark's mom, my dad wasn't a bad man, but he did do bad things. Mm-hmm. And it can happen to people, depending, on what's happened to them. Like,
depending on what's happening to them, that's right.
Yeah, you don't know. You don't know how you're going to deal with a tremendous amount of trauma till you're in the thick of it. Just like, even though I promised myself when I joined the military, I signed on the line. I said I was willing to kill people if I had to, in the defense of myself and others. But I also had to be willing to die for other people, and that's much harder. And I like to say, I'm pretty firmly convicted that I was able to do that at the time, had that been required of me. And like with the thing that happened in Texas, it enraged me that people who were supposed to defend children didn't. in my eyes. Now, I'm not them, and that's the caveat I have to make. I wasn't there. How would I have handled that as a man of 21? How would I handle that now as a man of 54 with a wife? I don't know. I can't say, because I've seen how good people can get twisted up.
All right.
I can condemn things, but I can't be absolute about it.
Yeah. Sorry to go off of that tangent, but I just think it's
I
really.
got a little deep there. Now we need some funny hippo palate cleanser.
Yeah.
So we still got to get Mark and Stephen to where they need to go. So we get a flashback scene of a young Mark leaving, and his father runs after him. And Stephen asks Mark, "Why you remember Mom like that?" And Stephen asks Mark, "What happened in that room?" And then so Mark tackles Stephen, and then they're now back in the desert, and then they realize now they're living the scenario where Mark has been in denial about, but basically Bushman changed the plan during the simple raid of the Egyptian tomb, and Mark didn't like that, so he wanted to save everybody, but he didn't, and so he also sees the corpse of Layla's father, Dr. El Fayouli, and you can tell him by the distinctive red scarf with the scarab on it. That's going to be significant next episode. And so we basically see the birth of MoonKnight, because we see that Mark is about to take himself out because he can't live with what he's allowed to happen or what he couldn't stop, however you want to perceive that. And then MoonKnight is conscious, like, what a waste. I love F. Murray Abraham's voice. We talked about that too. His voice is on point. So we've got James Earl Jones is all time, but Kevin Conroy, Lawrence Fishburne, and now F. Murray Abraham, they're all top 5 as far as I'm concerned. So we basically
Let's not forget the great Morgan Freeman.
And Morgan Freeman. I knew I was forgetting somebody. Morgan Freeman, top 5. So anyway, so basically what's interesting is how Mark and Stephen perceive the origin of MoonKnight, because Mark perceives it as, okay, he saved my life, he saved our lives, and so I've got to, work off this debt, but we've got these powers, and I was getting ready to end it all, but now at least I have a chance to try to make some amends and try to do some good in the world, because I failed at one of the worst possible times, along with all the other stuff I'm thinking about. And Stephen is like, Khonshu's a manipulator. Can't you see that he's been manipulating you from day one, from minute one? And the only reason he came to you was, like he said, is because you were broken and because you were at a vulnerable point. And so he got you to sign up for this bargain to do this dirty work because of the brokenness and the pain they were already both running from. So it's interesting to see how they both perceive that. But then, so now we go back to the boat. We're back on the soul boat with Tara, and then now all of a sudden, unbalanced souls are being judged before their time, and now she's like, all these souls coming through, and it was funny to me because it looked like brimstone. So it looked like the souls were coming through from the upper world, but it looked like it was like this brimstone kind of thing falling down. I'm like, okay, so they just blasting into hell like Samuel Guthrie, like they're cannonballing into hell, and like, they don't even know if they're supposed to go.
The Hell Express.
Okay, right. So then it gets convoluted because Stephen asked Tara to contact Layla so she can free Khonshu, so they can get the MoonKnight costume back, so they can get the powers back, so they can get healed. And I'm going to be coming back with a body and a bullet in it, so I need my MoonKnight powers. And I'm like, duh, it's not like we didn't know that was going to happen. So that's what I'm saying. All that could have happened quicker because, of course, you will. So finally, we're going to talk about the dissociative moments now. The last truth to be revealed in the bedroom that Mark didn't want Stephen to go into. And so Mark continues to resist revisiting the memories, but Stephen's like, Layla's going to die. Everybody's going to die. It'll be all your fault. And so Mark can't deal with that again. So, of course, they fight or whatever back in Dr. Harold's office. And so there's a lot of undercutting, but they have to eventually face the truth. So once again, they go back to the childhood bedroom with Stephen, and they see Mark curled on the ground, and we see the big reveal. And the big reveal is that Mark has made Stephen up. Mark is, while somebody's banging on the door, Mark is screaming, "It's not my mom. and Wendy's like open the door or whatever, and then they do the first change where his eyes roll back in his head, and Steven comes out, and that's when we see that Steven has been a created personality by Mark to help deal with the trauma of everything that's been revealed in this episode, from losing his brother to his mother's mental illness to his father trying to hold the family together and Mark not being able to process the guilt, and that chasing Mark as MoonKnight and not his guilt over Layla's father's death and that whole thing, because they tried to be all Raiders of the Lost Ark and it didn't work out. And so that moment hit me really hard, because to me it felt a little bit like the Clone Saga. What do you do when you realize you're Ben Reilly, or what do you do when you realize you're Jessica Drew, female version of Peter Parker, where you're not the real person, or you're not the first person, or maybe you think you're not real at all. And so when we see that happen, it's at the heart of the MoonKnight character, even though they took a lot of liberties with the comic story to make the show work. That part is still at the heart, that there are multiple personalities all trying to deal with this life that they're living. And so when that happened, it didn't make me like Steven more, but it made me look at everything differently. In that, it was because in some ways, now I know I'm reaching, but in some ways, that's what superheroes are about to begin with. They're escapism. One of the reasons sometimes we enjoy superhero content is because you get to escape into a world where you can really fight back. You get to escape into a world where maybe sometimes justice can be done. And if you don't become the champion, maybe a champion can fight for you. But the whole thing about superheroes is the ability to do things that you wish you could do, and the ability to right wrongs that you wish you could right. So I know I'm pushing the analogy, but I think it still rings true here. So on some level, that's why we enjoy such escapist content, because if we don't always live in a world where justice is done, we can create a world or escape into a world where justice is done. And so I really related to that little boy on the floor saying, I have to find a way to deal with my pain. I have to find a way, because I can't deal with it. It's too much. I can't face it. I can't face all this being my fault. I can't face the fact that I tore my family up in, maybe in a moment of machoism or bravado or foolishness. And now we can't ever come back and be a family. I can't deal. So I'm just going to disassociate. And that's another place where this show straddles the line between the real world and the fictional world, because it's dealing with dissociative identity disorder and just making up personalities. And that's very, very real. And making up stuff in your head, and that's really, really real. And sometimes when what Jeff just talked about creating a memory because you wanted it so bad, and then your brain convinces you that it actually happened. And that's real. Sometimes your brain twists the way you remember things because you don't want to deal with what actually went down. And so in that moment, this is going to sound kind of cheesy, but in that moment, I felt like we were all that little boy on the floor trying to find a way to cope with pain that we couldn't fully process. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the strength of the heart. And that was the moment of the show. That was the moment. And it also begged the question, how do you process your pain? We touched on a little bit in this conversation, but how do you process? And just to talk about, my personal experiences, I've discovered something. I've discovered that emotions do not dissipate. So when you're boiling a hot dog, or you're making a hard-boiled egg, or you're frying some meat and you set off the smoke alarm, you can, wave a towel or wave the broom, or you can turn on the fan over your grill, and the smoke will dissipate enough to shut the alarm off. I found out emotions don't work like smoke. You can depress them, suppress them, repress them, deny them, push them down, but they don't actually dissipate. They're going to come springing out. And normally undealt with emotions come out at the worst time in the worst way. And so that's what I mean when I say this show has done such a masterful job of making you take out what you believe and look at it, make you look at your process. Because I have discovered through living that emotions do not dissipate. You have to deal with them. And also, like we were talking about before, then I'm going to throw it out to you guys because I want to deal with the whole creation of Stephen. Also, it's that whole, we can't justify your behavior, but we can empathize and do want to understand your pain. We can't excuse when you do wrong things, but we can't understand maybe how you got to that point where you snapped or you wanted to snap or you did something foolish or whatever. That's the story of Anakin Skywalker, showing us how did you get to the point where you became that person. And so it's a really difficult dichotomy because justice has to be done if you've done something wrong. But at the same time, what happened to you to make you get there, to make you feel like that was a thing? And like I said, for me personally, I've discovered that you have to deal. That's what I meant to say, then I'm going to throw it to you guys. For the longest time, I haven't understood, but I've understood it eventually. How can I say this? We are different ages based on the subject. And what I mean by that is your soul is mature in some areas and immature in others. Your soul can be financially mature. You can be really, really good with money and really, really bad with people. You can be really, really good with organization and giving orders and really, really bad with being vulnerable. You can be really, really, really good with academics and studying subjects and mastering things, and really, really, really bad with truth. Like you're good with facts, but you're not so good with truth. And I've discovered that your soul can be different ages. You can be so mature in one area and such a child in another, to the point where you just surprise yourself. Like, now, where did that come from? Why did I do that? Why do I think that? Why am I reacting that way? And I've discovered both can live in the same soul. I was watching, what was it? Oh, okay. I was watching a Clinton Lewinsky special, and they were talking about the president's relationship with Monica. And all of the people, especially the news media, kept saying, how could he be so reckless? How could he be so reckless? How could he be so careless? How could he be so reckless? How could he not know? And I'm saying to myself, if y'all have been paying attention, it was kind of a frat bro mentality that Bill Clinton had his whole life. And it didn't stop just because he became president. He just didn't transition from being a frat bro to being a president in his head. And that's a real life example of what I'm talking about how you can be 40, 50 something years old in a position of power, but you still think you're some 22-year-old on campus who can just do whatever you want. And there's a disconnect. So with that, I'm gonna throw it out to my co-host. What do you think about the creation of Stephen? Nims.
Yeah, for me, man, this was just an incredibly powerful moment, and it hit home for a number of personal reasons. I guess I'm not, my soul is not emotionally mature enough to want to share that with everybody out there. Maybe I'll share that with friends. But yeah, I mean, it hit home. It was hard to watch, and yet I watched it multiple times, which says how good it is. The only thing that I really want, there were two things I really wanted to comment on, which was immediately I went to Stephen and what he was feeling. Because even though Stephen and Grant are the same person, and we have to, I think Jeff's point is so true on that, is that they are the same person. So it's like a lot of times we have to realize that even though they're having these arguments, it's somebody arguing with themselves, to a certain extent. But when Stephen finds out that he is not real, that he has been conjured up to go through the pain that Mark didn't want to go through, I think there was a missed opportunity there for some real drama. I mean, there was a little bit of drama, but you could have gone really deep. Because think about from the age of, what was he, 10, 12, when he was first came into being, Stephen Grant has had to deal with all of the pain that Mark Spector didn't want to deal with, all of the beatings, all of the lashing out, all of the abuse from his mother, the rejection, everything that Mark Spector didn't want to deal with, Stephen Grant bore. And it's like, and then to find out that your whole life, all of your pain is because of this other person. Talk about a way to write a drama and a catharsis and just an incredibly powerful moment of, I mean, there could have been some real anger and violence there, and honestly, depending on the type of show you're doing, you could have written that. I mean, I'm reminded of a movie that deals with personalities clashing like that. And it's completely fictionalized, but it's a great movie. It's a great horror movie, another John Cusack movie, Identity.
Oh, yeah.
Where all of the personalities come together in a hotel in the guy's head and they're killing each other off. It's like, that's the kind of thing you would get here, where suddenly one of the personality realizes, like, you SOB, you couldn't deal with all the pain, so you made me deal with it. So I was kind of like, there was a little bit of missed opportunity there, but maybe that would have been a step too far for Disney as well. So
it's something that would have required more than 6 episodes as well.
True.
Yeah. That's a really cool idea, though.
Yeah. So really, I mean, but yeah, I mean that is where I went. I mean, obviously there was all the very real emotions, the real emotional trauma, the flashbacks to things in my own life. And I think that's the thing, is that you can see the three of us, we come from vastly different backgrounds, but it affected all of us, because all of us, every single person has things in their life that they've dealt with. And I mean, maybe that is the lesson for all of us with what's going on, is that we need to understand that we need to, as fathers, as mothers, as parents, as teachers, as just people, be aware of that in other people. And if we see signs that someone's hurting, be there for somebody, to be that helping hand that maybe helps them get some help or something. Who knows what little bit of goodness you could do. But yeah, it's like, obviously this scene touched a lot of people, and I think it's because everybody has things that they're dealing with, the one affect the other. But for me, I really empathized with Stephen there, and I was like, man, talk about a revelation in your life where suddenly not only are you not real, not only do you come to the realization that you've been talking to someone who's dead all this time, but you were created to experience someone else's pain. Just an incredible story, plot hook. As a writer, it's gold. As a person, it's painful. And that's about all I feel. Yeah.
You're created by your little boy self to absorb all the pain that your little boy self couldn't process.
I mean, and other stories, we could maybe call that a version of hell. Honestly.
Yeah. No, yeah. All right, Bracy, what do you think? Creation of Stephen.
Okay, I'm going to say something that's actually pretty funny about this dark subject, which is relevant because he's a Jew. It's kind of like circumcision. It hurts a lot, but you don't remember it.
Yeah.
So yeah, just to lighten things up real quick.
Okay.
It just struck me as like, yeah, that's a Jewish thing, or some Gentiles as well. Yeah, like I've said, this was particularly poignant for me for a number of reasons. When you look at DID cases, this is often the genesis. A personality is created to protect the main, and we see this again in fiction. We've seen it in recently Glass and Split. How it starts off with one personality, which is to defend the main personality, and it's kind of like stepping on ice. You start to crack the ice, and the ice cracks more and more. I think this is where we get all these multiple personalities. Once the structure is weakened, it becomes more fragile, and the more the structure cracks, the more fragile it becomes, until some of these poor suckers get overwhelmed with personalities. I mean, it's rare, but it does happen. Like you mentioned, the most famous case, of course, Sybil with her 100 personalities. It's such an intriguing idea. I actually created a villain in my own world who's got DID, and almost all the personalities are awful, but a couple are maybe, we'll see. But I also like the trope that's set up here of the fake person who believes they're real. I'm a real boy. I thought about Schwarzenegger's. Yeah, Schwarzenegger did it excellently in a couple of movies. There was The Sixth Day, where Arnold, who we're watching as Arnold, we find out the Arnold we've been following along is a clone, and the guy in the background is actually the real Arnold, and he has to deal with that. He's like, "Oh, I thought I was fighting to get home to my wife." It's like, crap, that's not my wife, that's his wife. Dang it! Now what am I supposed to do? I got to get a new identity and all this other stuff. I got to figure out how to live my own life when I'm attached to your life because I've got all your memories. Terrible conundrum. He also did it. I like the point that even though it's not the same thing, I like the point made in the Last Action Hero when he stepped into the real world. And, speaking of Nim's point, when he met Schwarzenegger on the red carpet, he's like, "Oh, look at this double, man. I got to get him in some more movies." Like, no thanks. Like, everything in my life is because of you. I have been in so much pain because he's written to be an action hero with all these terrible things happening to him. His wife died because we talked about flashback. Somebody's got to die for character development, all this sort of thing. So it'd be awful to be a fictional character. I've actually thought about that as a writer. It's like, if I was ever, because you do these little exercises, if I was ever confronted with one of my creations, they'd probably want to shoot me to stop things. Like, oh, screw you, man! Like, why am I being chased by eldritch horrors? What's wrong with you? I was like, because you're not real. He's like, well, I am now. Bam, So it's a funny kind of thing to think about, and I love the exercise of it. And then when you're a writer, you start to put yourself into these ideas. Like, okay, how would I handle that if I found out I'm the Ben Rowley and not the Peter Parker? How do I manage that? Like, oh, I've got to suddenly make my way in a world where there's somebody else who looks just like me, sounds just like me, has my DNA, my fingerprints, a life that I thought was mine. How am I supposed to create a separate life when this dude's in the system? If I go to the hospital, if I get fingerprinted, if any of these things happen, I get flagged as this dude. How do you resolve that sort of thing? At least with Jessica Drew in the Ultimate Universe, she was a different gender. She had an easier time of creating her own life. But yeah, that's a tremendous conundrum. But as for Steven himself, I like seeing how and I do wish we could have had more time to watch him wrestle with this, because the first thing out of his mouth is like, I thought I was the original. And Mark did build a kindness into him, this amnesia for violence, where Mark doesn't want to take the pain. Steven takes the pain, but immediately afterward, Steven gets the blessing of not knowing about any of it, whereas Mark has to live with it. And that's the gift he gave Steven. It's like, you get to live thinking your mother loves you without knowing that you were beat, for whatever. You got to have a happy, normal life. You didn't go off and become a mercenary killer. You don't have that weighing on your soul. You don't have any of this. Like, you might have been a dork, you might have been a loser, but you had a normal life, and you could make of it whatever you wanted to. And, because he created Steven to be the antithesis of everything he was.
That's the whole point of you, is what
that's
Mark
the whole
said.
point of you. You're the my opposite in every way. So you've got at least a shot at not being me. Kind of based off of your action hero, but not quite, because he didn't want him to be aggressive, which is an interesting idea. Because, like I told you, once I hurt my little brother, and I realized just how easy it was to step off the edge of that cliff, and realizing how easy it was to be angry, how easy it was to react. I spent months forcing myself not to be angry, forcing myself to suppress, forcing myself to push all this down. And it had a consequence. There were a lot of years after that where I really lacked any sort of drive or aggression that a young man typically has. I was not assertive. I did not look to be a leader. I did not look to achieve. So, it wasn't until, maybe the military helped me get over that to a degree. You got to do some things, but yeah, for a long time, it messed with my relationships. I didn't have the confidence to have relationships. So my default personality, a cultivated personality, became the class clown, the joker, the guy who makes everybody happy, the guy who does things for other people, not for himself. So I can really see how this sort of thing happens. I've lived it to an extent, and then it took a long time to kind of become who I think I was probably always supposed to be, or at least as close to a whole person as I could have been beyond a certain point in my life. But there's it has a dramatic effect. There's lots of things you miss out on, lots of opportunities that pass you by if you're not fully yourself. And since then,
you said something right there.
Yeah, and since then I've been playing catch up, and I'm way behind the curve. And I wish it hadn't worked out like that, but that's how it was. And all I can do is try and do the best I can. So I look forward to seeing how Stephen and Mark can resolve this, because the two of them have to play catch up now. As their lives integrate. And so we see that's how Mark dealt with his anger, was by not dealing with it, whereas his mother had to dealt with her anger by lashing out. And because I've kind of been on both sides of that, I can empathize with both Mark and his mother, because even recently I went through a horrible medical condition that put me in nerve pain like you wouldn't believe for a year. And you can't go through a year of pain so bad that you don't fall asleep. You just pass out from exhaustion. That's when I had rest. You can't go through that as strong as you might think you are. And eventually you start lashing out at people around you because there's nobody else. I mean, nothing else. And my wife had to deal with me saying some awful stuff from time to time, or snapping for no reason.
I told you, man, emotions don't dissipate. But we
No,
wish they did, but they don't.
It's there. It's there. Like even knowing it was wrong and even regretting it, there was still such a well of pain in me that needed release, that I knew it was still going to happen again. And all I could do was do my best to keep my lid on it. And I couldn't be successful all the time. And so, yeah, when I see this episode, man, it strikes home so hard, and I empathize with these characters so much. I empathize with the dad. I empathize with Mark. I empathize with the mom. And again, I just cannot help but applaud Disney's decision to do something so mature and to do it so well. I love superhero stuff, but this is one of the few superhero things I've ever enjoyed that's really meaningful. So hats off, Disney. Hats off.
Absolutely. And this is probably the darkest that they've become in terms of this origin. So Stephen is trying to deal with everything he found out, and then they're back in the office. And then Dr. L's like, do you want to talk to your mom? He's like, yeah, I want to talk to my mom. My mother's not dead. My mother's not dead. And then Dr. Harris like, okay, I got Mrs. Grant on the phone. And then he's like, my mom is dead. Oh,
That was man, that was heartbreaking because like
yeah.
like when he didn't go to his mom's funeral, he's on the street,
Right.
and as soon as he snaps to Steven, what's the first thing he does? He calls mom. Oh, mom, it happened again. And his performance is so great in that moment, going from that tragic crying to like, I'm lost again. I can't believe it. He's like, man, Oscar Isaac is a friggin' genius.
Genius, and the writing is genius, and the direction is genius. And so as he's stumbling down the street,
Yeah, let's not forget that making a film is a collaborative effort.
that's right. As he's stumbling down the street, he sees his father and his child at home, and his father's trying to get him to come back or whatever. And then Mark says something very key. He said, "This was the moment our lives started bleeding into each other." So Mark created Steven to keep him away from all the pain and all the abuse. And Steven lived a whole life disconnected from those memories, not knowing that at all until all this goes down. And then now that Steven is being made to face the reality of his existence, then Mark was saying that when you couldn't sit Shiva at mom's funeral, when you couldn't accept that or whatever, now unearthing all this stuff, now all of a sudden the line between me and you sharing the body has begun to blur. But we must reiterate that Jake is in there too.
Yeah.
So if they do a second season, then we need to understand all this about Jake and when that started happening. So anyway, so they go through all that. So now they're at the gates of Osiris. Now they're in the field of reeds. And then Tara says something that we knew was going to happen. The scales didn't balance. And then the zombie souls start coming on. And like you said, we needed an action sequence. But Tara, of course, disappears. And so he's, steering the boat. And then, Steven all of a sudden gets confidence because he's like, well, I'm actually Mark. I'm not really me. I'm an extension of Mark. So, hey, I've got martial arts training too. Then all of a sudden he's like Neo in the Matrix. He's like, oh, I know Kung Fu. And so he starts doing all that. And so then, they're fighting all these different souls. And so, stop the boat, blah, 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 blah. And then, so Steven falls off the boat, collapses in the sand, and turns into a statue. And then as soon as that happened, of course, magically Mark's scales get balanced. And then he goes to the field of reeds. And we knew that's what was going to happen. And we know he's not going to stay. Because that's just too easy. And that's not the end of the episode. And so we know how all this is going to play out. Like, okay, so you had to tell your other personality the truth. And then he had to face it. But then in so doing, he got the confidence and he realized he can do some of the stuff you can do. And now he's not so much of a wimp anymore about, oh, I'm sorry. A zombie got him. He's dead. He's frozen in the sands of time. Now you get to go to Egyptian heaven. Okay, great. He's like, who's steering the soul boat? So, of course, yeah. So, so that's the last thing that happens in this episode. And then we've got to figure out, what he's going to do. And this is what I meant when I said this is a lot of story to develop and then wrap up with just one more episode left. And like I said, we've only gotten hints of Jake and all that different kind of stuff. So, so like I said, we saw all that coming, but, it ending the way it did. So there's multiple kind of things that have to be dealt with, but we've got to give Oscar Isaac his kudos for pulling off all these different personalities and making them look effortless. And just like the stuff we talked about tonight, making us feel the journey.
Yeah.
Just making us feel the journey, because that's what happened in this episode. The stuff you could relate to personally, the stuff you saw through somebody else's experience, but whatever it was, we felt this journey 1,000%. And so we got to tip the hat to the writers, the directors, and of course to Oscar Isaac. Even with the annoying Whedon character there, still didn't take away from the weight of everything that happened in this episode. So final thoughts, I pretty much already gave them, and that is that when I watched it through the first time, I'm like, this was really cool, and this was a tour de force of acting. But how exactly? Because there's not enough on it, and it's it's Harold, but it's Harold in the am I the doctor or am I the crazy zealot role, and it's not enough of the premise you set up. We see the souls coming down because Ami's doing that, but that means the emotional weight between her and Khonshu or her and Moon Knight that's not the heart of what's going on. It's what's going on inside of Mark, and so it's kind of two different stories. So maybe they did that on purpose, but the Moon Knight is now a thing. It's a mantle because Harold had the mantle. Now Mark has the mantle, but Mark Spector and Stephen Grant and Jake Lockley is another thing. So I'm saying I just needed, about 3 to 4 more episodes because we're going to see in the finale that Layla Al Faouli is a thing. So I'm like, well, okay, y'all pack this so chock full of characters and storylines until if we didn't get more episodes, we're going to need a season 2 because they're going to have to do some more stuff to flesh out everything that they started in season.
Mm-hmm.
They also need to reveal how Jake came into being. Why did he come into being?
That's right. That's right. Because it feels like another splinter in Mark's mind's eye. And at this point, it feels like it's because Mark couldn't fully deal with everything he had to do. Everybody had to kill him. What that means.
Yeah. It's like
Jake
he has to pop out when Mark's a mercenary.
Mm-hmm.
That's gotta be the time.
Jake is his rage. Jake is his killing rage. It's another part of his soul that's splintered. So,
But also a disconnect, like with Elektra. The reason Elektra's soul became so black is because she had to face what she had become.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what vengeance does to you. And when she realized what she becomes, she realized, I can't really be anything else. I've seen people say that in their life too. They've gone down a certain path, and then they say, well, maybe I want to come back, but some stuff you can't come back from.
Yeah, I've there's a lot of runaways who come to Myrtle Beach when I was when I was working at the Boulevard. They used to like to hang around where I worked because I was working at a haunted house at the time, and I'd talk to them. And someone was like, why don't you just, instead of scrabbling for money and spotting in a building, why don't you just go home? That is, if your home wasn't some sort of abusive nightmare. And they're like, oh, I've done stuff. I can't go back. Some people, even if their parents would welcome them with open arms and tears and hugs and kisses, inside they feel like they've gone too far. It's they who need to forgive themselves at that point. And if you can't do it, you don't.
That's right. That's right. As the old saying goes, a man can never step in the same water twice because when you step in the second time, your foot is wet. You're not the same man. All right. So if you guys got some final thoughts, my final thoughts are I'm looking forward to the finale. I just wish it was an expanded finale. I wish I would have watched 2.5 hours of finale just to get some more closure on everything that was set up in this episode alone. Final thoughts, Bracy.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just going into the finale, I wish we'd had a longer finale because, as we'll see next week, the finale feels pretty rushed to me. And they bolster that by making it pretty action-packed. As for this episode, it covered a lot of ground, and for the most part, it did exceedingly well to the point that I can even forgive the Disney-fying of certain elements. But it's a pretty heavy episode, and it dealt with like a lot of heavy, dark, poignant themes. So I get it. Probably the most enjoyable episode so far, just because it was so meaningful for me. And there is a part of me that hopes that we'll see Harrow again, not just in flashback as the Fist of Khonshu himself, but I kind of would like to see him as another part of Mark's psyche, because that's not the Harrow he knows. So I'd love to see Dr. Harrow jumping in and trying to mediate between the multiple personalities. I think returning to the asylum from time to time would be fun.
Well, and I want to reiterate, What I like on a I don't know, I guess on a writing level, is that they didn't try to justify anything like WandaVision did. They
Yeah.
let you feel the pain, they let you see what happened, but they weren't trying to make excuses. They were just saying, this is what happened. Nim's final thoughts.
Yeah, well, on that point you just said, I think that's the mark of good writing, which is you should just present the story for what it is and let people draw their own inferences, bring their own experiences into it. And that's what art is. Art can be different to every single person. It doesn't change the story of what you put out there, but it has different meanings to different people based on what they experience and what their experiences are. I think that I love this episode. I think it was an incredible episode of television. The only thing I would say is that as we were talking on reflection, I just wish that more of the series had been like this, that we had spent more time dealing with what was going on in his head instead of dealing with shenanigans. I guess that's the best way I could describe it.
Mans.
You know, I think that this right here is what makes Moon Knight so interesting, because he is a splintered character and having to deal with those different splinters of his mind. You know, I'll just leave it at this and then we can get out of here. I just got done rereading some Moon Knight, and I read Crazy Runs. I think was it the Crazy Runs in the Family?
Yeah.
Arc. And it's just, you know, I mean, the most interesting part about that is one of the personalities impregnated Mark's girlfriend, you know, without him knowing. I mean, just talk about story gold, you know, for drama and everything else. So
Moon Knight's multiple personality in the comics is far more satisfying than the Hulk's multiple personality, which was only really good when Peter David was at the helm. Nobody else has done it as well since. But between the comics and what they've done here, Moon Knight's just more satisfying when it comes to dealing with this particular issue.
Yeah, and you could just, there's so much you could do with it, and I think that this is a great roadmap to where they could go and where I'd like them to go, especially if you're going to explore, you know, Jake Lockley in the future, which it seems like they want to do. So I think there is a lot to work with there, especially with the just pure. I mean, now that you have Steven and Grant and Mark getting together, why do I keep wanting to call him Grant? Mark getting together, you know, and cooperating together, they have this third personality. You know, there's just a lot to work with there. So hopefully they will do something with that.
Cool. All right. I want to say thank you to everyone that watched this live. I want to say thanks to everyone that's watching on the replay. Don't forget to check out our other content on United Capes Podcast Network and Comic Crusaders. We literally have something for everybody. If you're into retro stuff, if you're into old monsters, we've got interviews with creatives. We've got a whole bunch of stuff that is coming out that we're doing. So, you know, we're all about the creativity on the United Capes Podcast Network and the Comic Crusaders channel. And me and this crew, plus Steve, I keep disappearing from the shot. We'll see you next time for the finale of Moon Knight. Next time on the next episode of Sloppy Spoilers. We'll see you then.
See you, everybody.
I'd like to